According to what I've studied and the proof I will be presenting you, I believe the founding fathers of the United States did not give us freedom of religion to protect Christianity, but they did it because they had another secret agenda. And that is what I will try to prove to you in this video, so I pray you stay to the very end. Some have told me that I contradict the spirit of prophecy. I would like to straight out tell you that I do not. I would never contradict the prophet of God. Ellen White says, Republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation. These principles are the secret of its power and prosperity. I totally agree with this statement. The United States was founded on Protestant principles in regards to freedom of religion. I do not disagree with this. What I will try to show you is the reason behind why it was founded in this manner. Now, God did utilize these principles to raise up his remnant church, deposit his truth, so it can be taken to the world. But Satan used these principles as well. Revelation 13:11 says, And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. A lot of times we read the text without paying attention to what it really is saying and interpret them according to what so many before us have interpreted it to mean. It's time to examine them microscopically, as Pastor Randy Skeet always says. Now, a text says that the beast had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. It does not say that for some time it would be like a lamb and further on down it would talk or speak as a dragon. No, it says, and spoke like a dragon. So it looked like a lamb, but spoke as a dragon. Present, not future. I've shown in a previous video that Uriah Smith and some of our pioneers said from the start that it spoke as a dragon. They believed that a country that approved slavery could never be a lamb-like nation, a Christ-like nation. Maybe many didn't know this, but from the very beginning, there was religious persecution in the newfound land. I would like to go back in time and start around 1100. The Knight Templar. The Knight Templars were a military order created in 1119 to protect the pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. But they ended up being loan sharks. They were the first bankers involved in the occult and worshiping Baal. In 1307, King Philip IV of France accused the Templars of heresy. This led to their arrest and eventual dissolution of the order by Pope Clement V in 1312. Many Templars survived and went in hiding. It is believed that some found refuge within the stonemasons guilds that would later give rise to Freemasonry. Here's an interesting fact. The Templars were arrested on Friday the 13th of October in 1307. This brought an end to the reign of terror, and today the world views Friday the 13th as something dark and sinister, something evil, when in fact it was the day that justice was made. The Kirkwall Scroll and the Jesuit Order. The Kirkwall Scroll contains an inscription of a Christian cross with the inscription ISH, a variation on the classic acronym IHS. In Masonic tradition, IHS stands for Isis, Horus, and Seb. Based on the Egyptian tradition held dear by the Templars, the inscription IHS is used primarily by the original Knights Templar and the Jesuits, suggesting a historical connection between the surviving Templar and the Jesuit order of the late 16th century. This connection shows that the original Templars were the same Knights that continued operating through the Vatican Jesuits, as well as having their protection. The Jesuit order was founded officially in 1534. This provided yet another link between Freemasons, Knights Templar, and the Jesuits. Now we'll see the Order of de Molay. Jacques de Molay was a French nobleman and the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, whose teachings still continue through secret societies. We actually have one right here in Argentina. In Morals and Dogma, one of the most popular books within Freemasonry, the Grand Master Albert Pike, who lived between 1809 and 1891, revealed the true purpose of the Templars. The Templars' goal, he said, was to acquire influence and wealth, and then intrigue and, if necessary, fight to establish Johannine or Gnostic and Kabbalistic dogma. On the 13th of January, 1128, during the Council of Troyes, the Pope officially recognizes the order. The upper echelons of the order, in particular, had also become familiar with and incorporated into their practice beliefs based on the mystical teachings of the Kabbalah, influenced by the Bogomils and the Luciferians, thus leaving Christianity behind. According to a Templar, Jesus was a god who ruled in another world, with little or no power in our own. Satan was the lord of this material world. The candidates who wished to join the order had to deny God, Christ, and the saints, commit sacrilegious acts, spit and urinate on the Holy Cross. Baphomet was a deity worshipped by the Knights Templar, and in black magic, the source and creator of evil, the satanic goat to the witches. Alice Bailey, well-known Luciferian, founded her own order of Freemasonry in 1930. For those who thought women cannot be Freemasons, we're wrong. You'll be able to see in the image here the hierarchy of the Freemasons. On the last step, you can see a 33rd degree Freemason next to a Knight Templar. One step below, you can see a Knight of Malta. Underneath the ark, to the right, wearing a black robe, you can see the Order of Demolay, supposedly the last surviving Knights Templar. Reread in Morals and Dogma. Hugo Defiance himself did not possess that keen, visionary intellect or that grandeur of purpose that later did distinguish the military founder from other soldiery and became formidable to kings. The Templars were unintelligent Jesuits and therefore unsuccessful. We can see then a connection between the Knight Templars, Freemasons, and the Jesuits, as well as with Alice Bailey, a very well-known Luciferian. Now let's go to the history of the Puritans and their arrival into the New World. Now Puritans, Baptists, Methodists, they all fled from Europe to escape from papal persecution. They wanted nothing to do with the Pope or his religion. The Puritans sought to create a godly commonwealth, a society governed by the principles of their faith. Their worldview was based on the belief that church and state should work in harmony to uphold and enforce God's law as revealed in the Bible. The Puritans did not believe in separation of church and state. They wanted to impose their religion, so they tried just that. They wanted to establish a theocracy where civil laws aligned with religious beliefs, and the state would be responsible in maintaining divine order. This interrelation between the religious authority and politics was a characteristic feature of the Puritan vision for their community. You could not hold office within government unless you were a Puritan. The Quakers fought for freedom of religion in Puritan Massachusetts between 1656 and 1661. The first well-known Quakers that arrived to Boston and defied their Puritan religious domination were Mary Fisher and Anne Austen. These two women arrived at the port of Boston aboard the Swallow, a ship from Barbados, in July of 1656. The Puritans from Boston greeted Fisher and Austen as if they carried the plague and brutally mistreated them. They were stripped naked, searched, and accused of witchcraft, put in jail, and starved. Later, they forced them to abandon Boston aboard the Swallow as they left 8 weeks later. The Inquisitions continued in the New World, but under a different flag. President Taft said, "We speak with great satisfaction of the fact that our ancestors came to this country to establish freedom of religion. Well, if you are to be exact, they came to establish freedom for their own religion and not the freedom of anybody else's religion." President Taft. They had fled papal persecution, and now they wanted to force their religion and not let out any other. They acted in the same way as did those that persecuted them in the Old World. Mary Dyer, who died in 1660, ran into problems with the authorities of Massachusetts for supporting the theological dissenter Anne Hutchinson. As a result, Dyer and her family were forced to move to Rhode Island in 1638. Converted to Quakerism in England in the 1650s, Dyer returned to New England and was arrested and banished from Massachusetts 3 times for spreading Quaker principles. Upon returning to Massachusetts for the 4th time, she was hanged on June the 1st of 1660. But the Quakers were not the only ones persecuted in the New World. John Tracy Ellis wrote that a universal anti-Catholic prejudice extended to Jamestown in 1607 and was vigorously cultivated throughout the 13 colonies, from Massachusetts to Georgia. Colonial charters and laws contain specific prohibition against Roman Catholic political power. Alice noted that a common hatred of the Roman Catholic Church could unite Anglican and Puritan clergy and laity despite their many other disagreements. In 1642, the English colony of Virginia enacted a law prohibiting the entry of Catholic settlers. 5 years later, the Massachusetts Bay Colony enacted a similar law. In 1649, the Toleration Act was passed in the province of Maryland, making blasphemy and opprobrious religious insults punishable offenses. However, it was repealed in 1654, thus prohibiting Catholic activity. By 1692, Maryland, formerly Catholic, overthrew its government, established the Church of England by law, and forced Catholics to pay heavy taxes. They were banned from all political participation, and additional laws were introduced prohibiting the Mass, church sacraments, and Catholic schools. Driven by the sacred duty to find refuge for his Roman Catholic brethren, George Calvert, who lived from 1580 to 1632, obtained a charter from Charles I in 1632 for the territory between Pennsylvania and Virginia. This Maryland charter offered no guidelines on religion, although it was assumed that Catholics would not be molested in the new colony. In 1634, two ships, the Ark and the Dove, brought the first settlers to Maryland. On board were approximately 200 people. Among the passengers were two Catholic priests who had been forced to board surreptitiously to escape the reach of English anti-Catholic laws. Upon landing in Maryland, the Catholics were spiritually guided by these Jesuits. Until the American Revolution, Maryland Catholics were dissidents in their own country, sometimes living under siege, but remaining faithful to their convictions, a faithful remnant waiting for better times. As you can see, Quakers as well as Catholics were persecuted and prohibited from having political office or for practicing their religion in public. The Jesuits had to continue their work in the New World. Something had to be done. Now let's take a look at our founding fathers that signed the Declaration of Independence and freedom of religion. The first president of the United States, George Washington, Freemason. Third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, Freemason. Fifth president of the United States, James Monroe, Freemason. Seventh president of the United States, Andrew Jackson, Freemason. The 27th president of the United States, William H. Taft, Freemason. Some other Masons that were there, Benjamin Franklin, John Paul Jones, Lewis Meriwether, William Clark, and Voltaire. So the founding fathers who signed for freedom of religion, where the government cannot impose any law in favor of religion, were in the majority Freemasons. The Catholics were being persecuted and were not allowed to advance their religion. So being that Freemasons, Knights Templar, and Jesuits are all brothers, kind of gives us an idea of the reason behind all of this, right? A cardinal recently requested a dialogue with Freemasons. This is in February 20th of 2024. Following a closed-door meeting in Milan, Cardinal Francesco Coco Palmiero reportedly said he believed there had been an evolution in mutual understanding between Freemasonry and the church over the past 50 years. My question is, how can a church that supposedly worships Christ have understanding with an order that worships Satan and denies Christ? Obviously, something had to be done in the New World to allow Catholic Jesuits to advance freely with their plans. So I'll leave you with this. Revelation 13:11. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and spake as a dragon. It says spoke like a dragon. It does not say it will speak at some point like a dragon. Since they arrived in the New World, religious persecution continued against the Quakers, Lutherans, Calvinists, and also the Catholics. A house against itself cannot survive. So if both sides serve the same master, how can one go against the other? Or is it just what they wanted us to believe? For me, the reason for religious liberty was so that the Jesuits could continue with their plans to infiltrate the New World and destroy Protestantism. Revelation 12:17 tells us, "And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." The Jesuit order was created for that purpose alone. They worked through secret societies. They were created to destroy Protestantism. But at the same time, God used those liberties to help expand Protestantism. Unfortunately, today, we see that most of them are returning to Rome. But a remnant still remains that will continue to protest and continue until Christ's return. May God help us. Thank you.